So today we're going to dig into the story of Saddleback Church, which was, for a long time, one of the biggest empires in modern Christianity. But this isn't just a story about success. Nope. This is about how the very system that built this massive empire, well, it also had the blueprint for its own collapse baked right in. Let's get into it. 88.46%. This is the number that just sealed the deal. I mean, that was the decisive, absolutely overwhelming majority vote that kicked one of America's most influential churches right out of its denomination, the Southern Baptist Convention. Just an institutional earthquake. So you have to wonder, right? What exactly happened here? Was this some kind of sudden, shocking betrayal? Or was this the completely predictable end of a journey that started 4 decades earlier, with the answer hiding in plain sight, right inside the system that built the whole thing? All right, let's start with that really dramatic outcome. Because in June of 2023, after years and years of tension, the final verdict came down. And just like that, an empire found itself on the outside looking in. But here's what's so wild. Unlike so many other big church collapses we've seen, this wasn't about some huge scandal or financial mess. This was totally different. The very DNA of Saddleback, the model that made it a global phenomenon, is what ultimately led to this fracture. It's almost like it collapsed by design. So what was the official reason? The public flashpoint, the thing that kicked it all off, was a clear, unambiguous line that Saddleback decided to cross. And in doing so, they directly challenged the rules of their entire denomination. It all came to a head on Mother's Day 2021. That's when Saddleback went public and ordained 3 women as pastors. Now, for the Southern Baptist Convention, whose official statement of faith says the office of pastor is strictly limited to men, this was a non-negotiable. It was a direct violation. And that single act triggered an official inquiry that led straight to that expulsion vote. But to really get why Saddleback made that choice, you got to rewind the clock all the way back to 1980. See, the philosophy behind this church was revolutionary from day one, and it holds the key to everything that happened decades later. And this was the engine, the core of it all, the seeker-sensitive model. To put it simply, founder Rick Warren decided he was going to build a church for people who hated church. So instead of asking believers what they wanted, he asked non-believers. He basically applied modern market research to ministry. And the process was incredibly methodical. First, Warren's team surveyed tons of people, asking one simple question: why don't you go to church? They got answers like, it's boring, it's judgmental, it's irrelevant. They took all that data and created a fictional avatar, Saddleback Sam. From that moment on, every single decision, from sermon topics to the music, even the parking signs, was filtered through one question: would this work for Sam? The whole goal was to remove every possible point of friction. And you know what? The results were absolutely staggering. The purpose-driven blueprint didn't just build a big church. It built a global machine of influence that completely changed the face of modern Christianity. It really started with this book. Over 50 million copies sold. The Purpose-Driven Life took the whole Saddleback philosophy and packaged it for a global audience. It ended up becoming one of the best-selling nonfiction books of all time. But the model wasn't just something people read about. It was taught. Over 400,000 pastors from all over the world were trained in the Saddleback system. They were basically exporting its DNA, its assumptions about growth and relevance, into thousands and thousands of other churches. And back home, the church itself grew into a behemoth. At its peak, weekly attendance was topping 25,000 people across all its locations. I mean, the scale was just undeniable. So when you look at the whole arc right here, it becomes so clear. It starts small, a church in a high school theater in 1980. By the 2000s, it's a global phenomenon with huge cultural influence. And then the conflict starts, leading to that public break in 2023. That's a remarkable 43-year run from a tiny startup to expulsion. But all of that success, it came with a hidden cost. For decades, a quiet theological critique was building, one that argued the model's intense focus on growth came at the expense of the gospel itself. This quote, right here, it gets to the very heart of the criticism. The shift at Saddleback wasn't seen as some sudden rebellion. It was seen as a slow, gradual drift. It began with little choices, what to emphasize in a sermon, what topics to avoid, that over decades completely reshaped the church's core identity. And that drift, well, it created 2 fundamentally different missions. Saddleback, this market-driven church, was always asking, how can we reach more people? But the Southern Baptist Convention focused on doctrinal purity, was asking, who are we and what do we believe? You see, a market-driven church adapts to its audience, to the culture, but a doctrine-driven denomination holds tight to its historical creed. And eventually, on an issue like women in leadership, those two paths just had to diverge.
For years, theologians like Michael Horton and John MacArthur, they were raising alarm bells. They argued that the model treated church like a product, that it replaced difficult theology with comfortable self-help just to appeal to Saddleback Sam. The core concern was always the same. This system was brilliant at attracting a crowd, but was it actually building deep, mature believers?
So where does this all leave us? The expulsion wasn't really the end of the story. It was the beginning of a much bigger conversation about the legacy of this model and what it means for modern institutions.
Because Saddleback's story isn't unique. Not really. When you look at other major megachurch implosions, Hillsong, Mars Hill, Willow Creek, you see a really similar pattern. Explosive growth, a charismatic founder, and a system that eventually just buckled under all that institutional stress. It really suggests the vulnerabilities might be built right into the model itself.
And that leaves us with this final, really challenging question. The purpose-driven model was built on a simple premise. Its success was proof that it worked. But now that the empire has fractured, we're forced to ask a much harder question. When the metrics and the huge crowds are gone, what's left? And at the end of the day, what's more important, building for crowds or building for conviction?